Okay, we will call the meeting of Assembly Committee on Education to order. Welcome, everyone. Committee members, for roll call, please unmute yourself and say here or present. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Duran.
Here.
Assemblyman Flores.
Present.
Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hanson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hardy.
Here.
Assemblywoman Krasner.
Here.
Assemblywoman Marzola.
Here.
Assemblyman MacArthur.
Here.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Here.
Assemblywoman Nguyen.
Here.
Assemblywoman Tolles.
Here.
Assemblywoman Torres.
Here.
Chair Bilbray Axelrod.
Here. Please note for the record that we do have a quorum. Welcome to everyone attending online. If you have not done so already, please mute your microphone when you're not speaking to minimize the background noise. Additionally, committee members, please keep your cameras on for the duration of the meeting so we can ensure that we have a quorum present. Let me know if there's a reason that you need to leave so I'm aware and we can stay on top of that. Meeting materials can be accessed on the committee webpage on Nellis. And just a reminder for those of you who are watching online, in this virtual world, we have several screens going on at once. So if you see committee members looking away, they are looking at materials for the committee on one of our several devices we have. So the overview for today, we have two presentations. First, we'll hear from Nevada's Department of Education on their annual report on the state of public education and the statewide plan for improvement of pupils. And then we'll have a presentation from Data Insight Partners on Nevada's class sizes and educator workforce. Now we will go to public comment. I will open it up. Public comment will be limited to 10 minutes, beginning of today's meeting. An additional opportunity to make public comment will be available at the end of the meeting. Please remember to clearly state and spell your name and limit your comments to 2 minutes. Staff in our broadcast and production services, please add the first caller with public comment to the meeting.
Good afternoon, Chair. The line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
Thank you very much. So we will move on to our first presentation. I'd like to invite State Superintendent Ebert to begin her presentation when she is ready. Thank you, Superintendent, for being here.
Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here with the Assembly Committee on Education. Chair Bilbray Axelrod. Wow. Sorry, I had a hard time with that today. Vice Chair Miller. For the record, my name is Joan Ebert. I'm the State Superintendent of Public Instruction. I'm also joined this afternoon by Jessica Tudman, as well as Sarah Nick, who will be participating in the presentation. I know that you have 100 slides before you, but I will tell you we're not going through all 100. We just wanted to make sure that you had the data that you needed for the annual report. So this afternoon, we're going to be sharing a combined presentation on the 2020 STEP, or the statewide plan for improvement of pupils, and the annual report. I'm able to do this because the reporting requirements for the STIP and the annual plan are based on the same accountability data. I also want to note that Senate Bill 76, known as the Education Agility Act, proposes several streamlining efforts to maximize our work. And one of the key recommendations is that the STIP would take place of the annual report requirement and make a more holistic and informed view of the state status of education. So when I very first returned home to Nevada and realized that we were going to go through our process looking at the STIP, it was very important to visit every single school district in our state. I had the pleasure of working in the Clark County School District for 25 years. I've worked with my colleagues across the state, but I had not spent time listening to the voices across. So I was joined by Deputy Gonzalez, Deputy Moore, and Deputy Hartz, and we toured the state. And it was great to hear from our constituents and those we serve. And I will tell you, being from Clark originally, that there's that tendency to say Clark County School District, Washoe County School District, and the rurals. I am here to tell you they are not one group. They are unique in everything that they have to offer their students and their learning context. It's very beautiful to see and how they achieve the same goals and expectations that we have for all of our students. We met with teachers, we met with superintendents, their cabinet members, we met with board members, parents, community. I know some of the legislators here joined in on some of those listening tour meetings. What was important, big takeaways there, is that our students clearly articulated what they wanted to see for their education. Things like they wanted to have a licensed math teacher that was before them. Some of the students even asked for a longer school day and longer school year because they care about their education and enjoy it so much. The families also asked for additional career and technical education courses, art, music, other things that expand beyond the core courses. Parents want to be informed and they want to be involved. School boards were asking for more transparency and predictability in school funding. And our teachers were candid about the pressures that they face every day in the classroom. They're committed to the communities and the support that they have from their communities. They also wanted to see expanded support from the leaders within our state. And so those were the major components that played a role in the development of our STIP. Every single staff member within the department had a hand and a voice in the culmination of this. We also asked superintendents to weigh in. Our own state board of education weighed in several times. It was brought to them 4 times prior to final approval. I want to take just a moment with our values. We actually started this process, this accountability report, as well as our STIP is due in March of every year. And as you know, it was a year ago when the pandemic hit. And so all of this work was prior to the pandemic. But as we went through the pandemic, what grounded the entire team were the values that we came to as we brought this work together. And first and foremost is our equity value. You see access to quality, success, inclusivity, community, and transparency in all our work. And that has defined us as we have moved forward. The next 2 slides clearly show you our 6 goals. We used to have 12 objectives. And what we noted as a team is that each of the objectives was really built off on a specific team. So we had an objective that had to do with educators. That team that worked with our teachers and teacher effectiveness was in charge of that goal. We have PK standards. It was very siloed. And so we were very intentional in these next 6 goals that you see, that it is every single team member across the department, the State Board of Education, leading this work, making sure that we all see ourselves in every single goal. With that, I'm going to turn the time over to Sarah Nick, who's going to show and demonstrate how the entire STIP is laid out. And then she'll turn it over to our Chief Strategy Officer, Jessica Todman.
Thank you, Superintendent. Good afternoon, Chair Bilbray Axelrod and Vice Chair Miller, members of the Assembly Committee on Education. This is Sarah Nick for the record. This slide shows how our values and goals come together to drive the department's work. Where each goal intersects with a value, there is a strategy, like the example you see on this slide. We also developed inputs, outputs, and outcomes, or IOOs, that represent our implementation plan for the STIP. In the spirit of transparency, for the first time, the STIP publishes what NDE will be doing, along with our stakeholders, to accomplish our goals and strategies. Now that we've introduced the STIP's organizational framework, we'll tour through each of the STIP goals with relevant data as required by the annual report. Our very first goal relates to early childhood learning, where our investment has the highest return. Investing in early care and education is important because the circumstances of the first 1,000 days of a child's life can change the course of their future. On many stops of the listening tour, we had the opportunity to observe high-quality early education, as well as to hear directly from parents and families about pre-K access as a game changer in their communities. Initiatives including full-day kindergarten, Read by Grade 3, and Silver State Stars Quality Rating and Improvement System, or QRIS, have been instrumental to improve the quality of early education in Nevada. In addition, the Silver State Stars QRIS informs families and parents regarding care choices and what high quality truly means. To support our efforts around equity and accountability, also in accordance with the federal Every Student Succeeds Act, Nevada reports student data disaggregated by race and ethnicity, as well as special population status, which includes students with disabilities or differently abled students, students who are English learners, and students eligible for free or reduced price lunch. As of 2018 and 19, we also include data for students experiencing homelessness or foster youth and military-connected students. Research shows that the single most important in-school determinant of student success is the quality of teaching. Goal 2 reflects the importance of all students having access to effective educators, which informs the supply pipeline we need to create with educator preparation programs, as well as our work with public schools and districts and regional professional development programs to design resources for educators. Student enrollment in K-12 public schools has grown by nearly a 15% increase in students in just 10 years. Our student population has been changing rapidly over the past 10 years. The percentages of students who identify as Black, students who identify as Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, and students who identify with 2 or more races have also increased, while percentages of students who identify as Native American, Indian, or Asian have decreased slightly. Today, over 40% of Nevada students identify as Hispanic, while white students make up just over 30% of the student population. In addition, 14% of students are English learners, and over 65% of students are eligible for free or reduced price lunch. This table demonstrates that the self-reported race ethnicity of Nevada's teachers does not currently reflect the demographics of our students. For example, while only 28% of Nevada students identify as white, 81% of Nevada's teachers identify as white. This problem is not unique to the Silver State. While approximately 50% of P-12 students in the US are young people of color, approximately 80% of the current US teacher force is, by societal definitions, white. Recruiting and retaining a diverse group of highly effective educators is essential to our efforts to ensure that all students experience continued academic growth and graduate globally prepared. I want to note that Goal 3 articulates our commitment to support student achievement with a focus on growth. We acknowledge that all learners come to school with different assets and opportunities. Our job as educators is to meet students where they are and encourage their growth on the path to becoming lifelong learners. The 2020 Annual Report of Accountability looked very different from prior years. Due to the circumstances of COVID-19, NDE applied for and received approval for a federal accountability waiver and worked with the governor to remove state assessment requirements for the 2019 and 20 school year. This means that districts and schools were not required to administer anticipated assessments and meet reporting requirements, including the SBAC, EOCs, the MAP, and the NSPF. Smarter Balanced exams are taken each spring by all students in grades 3 through 8 as a federal requirement to assess their acquisition of skills and knowledge in English language arts and mathematics. Statewide, students in all grades improved in mathematics proficiency from the 2018-19 school year over the previous year. Grades 4, 6, and 7 made the largest percentage point gains in mathematics proficiency for this assessment year. I'll now turn our time over to Chief Strategy Officer Jessica Todman, who will finish the tour of our STIP goals.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, Chair Bilbray Axelrod, Vice Chair Miller, and members of the committee. I'm Jessica Todman for the record. Based on the invaluable feedback gathered during the listening tour, the theme of the 2020 STIP is Battle-Born, Globally Prepared. Globally Prepared, as represented in Goal 4, encapsulates what our students need to be future ready, whatever the next few decades may hold. The strategies in Goal 4 seen here ensure our students graduate with the tools they need to build a home, a life, and a future. Of course, graduation looked and felt a little different for our class of 2020 due to COVID-19. Based on the recommendations of a work group of stakeholders that we convened, and with the support of the governor, we also issued a waiver of the civics assessment as a graduation requirement. We wanted to ensure that no student faced an undue burden in receiving the diploma they had earned. The next slide shows the top-level highlights of the class of 2020 graduation rates. Thanks to the work of our amazing students, educators, and staff, Nevada had a graduation rate of over 80% for the 4th year in a row. The rate fell slightly from the prior years, but we had 13 districts with rates exceeding the state average and 5 districts with rates over 90%. The Nevada Department of Education is committed to addressing gaps between and among student groups as reflected in our STIP values and strategies. Slide 45 of this presentation's appendix shows how we hone in on disaggregated data on opportunity gaps. Expanding equitable access to high-quality learning opportunities and effective educators are key to putting all learners on a path to long-term success. Slide 24 shows graduation rates for students from special populations, including those who are eligible for free or reduced price lunch, those who are differently abled, who are English learners, who are experiencing homelessness, and foster youth. The strategies that support Goal 5 ensure that the state's investment in education is efficient and effective and supports student success. These strategies focus on fully expending available funding, proactively managing funds through technical assistance and monitoring, and improving our customer service. As you know, Nevada's public schools and districts are currently funded by the Nevada Plan, which does not adequately account for demographic and socioeconomic differences among our increasingly diverse student body. Senate Bill 543 of last session laid the groundwork for the development of the new pupil-centered funding plan to address the current and future needs of our children. The Commission on School Funding has identified 4 concepts that are the basis for their work, which closely align with our STIP values and lead with equity first. This slide summarizes the pupil-centered funding plan as laid out in SB 543. Revenue sources that were previously funding over 80 distinct programs are now combined into the State Education Fund and distributed through the tiered progression on the right side of the slide. This approach advances equity and transparency and supports districts and schools in tailoring supports to the unique needs of their students. For example, rather than a student who is an English learner only receiving funding if their school has enough English learners to qualify for Zoom, they will now receive extra support through weighted funding no matter where they attend school. The money follows the student. The next slide shows the shifts in the pupil-centered funding plan that are included in the governor's recommended budget. The governor has recommended a phased implementation approach to ensure the equity and transparency that are the core of this work while allowing flexibility given the current circumstances. The phased approach includes an implementation of the pupil-centered funding plan during the 21-23 biennium for state revenues that are currently distributed through the department, which includes base funding as well as state-funded grants. The second phase would begin in 23-25, when local revenues would be combined with state revenues as part of full implementation. This delay in combining state and local revenues will allow school districts to manage resources to meet the needs of their communities as we continue to navigate our pandemic response and resulting economic uncertainties. Another aspect of our work that is key to Goal 5 is financial transparency. The federal Every Student Succeeds Act included a financial transparency requirement that we were proud to convene a work group to implement in the Nevada report card. The department was already reporting funding amounts for instruction, instructional support, operations, and leadership, and the data were broken down by funding amount and percentage by state, district, and school. In response to federal requirements, the data are now further broken down by personnel expenditures, which include salaries and benefits, and non-personnel, which include all other costs related to providing an education to students. Appendix I of the presentation provides step-by-step instructions on accessing this financial data on the Nevada report card. Our final goal, Goal 6, focuses on providing safe learning and working environments where identities and relationships are valued and celebrated. In 2015, the Office for a Safe and Respectful Learning Environment was established at the Nevada Department of Education. This prioritizes the safety and well-being of students and adults in our schools. We know that if students do not feel safe and valued, they'll struggle to grow and succeed academically. In addition, promoting emotional and physical safety for educators means Nevada is more likely to retain them. In 2018, the School Safety Task Force was convened and tasked with making recommendations captured in Senate Bill 89. One of those recommendations was disaggregating discipline data. The results here represent the first time these data have been reported by student group. Going from right to left, the green columns represent the percentage of total enrollment for each of the 7 major race and ethnicity categories of students. The yellow column represents the percentage of total suspensions experienced by the group of students. And the blue column is the percentage of total expulsions for that student group. The rates of expulsion and suspension, are not proportional to enrollment for many of our student groups. And the disproportionality is most drastic for our students who identify as Black, who are expelled at rates more than 3 times their enrollment rate. The next slide is disaggregated by special populations, where we see the most stark disproportionality among special populations of students who are receiving special education services. During the 2019 school year, those students were expelled or suspended at rates over 1.5 times higher than their proportion of enrollment. Assembly Bill 490 requires regular updates on this discipline data to the State Board of Education. It also requires the department to support schools through training and professional development on generating and interpreting these types of reports, as well as developing a responsive plan of action for addressing trends in disproportionality. We're working with a group of stakeholders currently from across the state to create and provide these supports, and look forward to be giving an update in the future. Another lens through which we assess learning environments is the School Climate Survey, which has been administered since 2015. The department has worked closely with stakeholders to develop resources and tools to make accessing and using the results easy and useful. And you can see the links provided here, where you can access a peer matching tool as well as an interactive data tool that allows users to explore and compare detailed results. Because the state's climate survey includes items from the National School Climate Survey, we're able to benchmark against students' perceptions nationally and use different conditions here to identify most favorable, favorable, least favorable for each of these 4 climate constructs. As you can see, the statewide results have been improving in all categories over the past 5 years. It is important to note here the large difference between students' perceptions of their emotional safety versus those of their physical safety, which indicates a need to continue to invest in increased mental health and social emotional supports. Before we conclude, I wanted to provide a very brief overview of some other aspects of our COVID-19 response, which of course has significantly affected education over the past 11 months. When the Nevada Department of Education began to organize in response to the public health crisis, we worked with the state board to identify priorities that have guided all of our work in response. You can see here that equity is leading among our priorities. The governor's responsiveness during uncertainty allowed the department and our schools to provide necessary guidance and support to students, staff, and families. The 6 emergency directives listed here address the phase of our response, beginning with school building closures and culminating with supports and guidance for reopening school buildings this fall. We were committed to providing guidance, flexibility, and resources to district schools and families to navigate this time. All of our guidance was seen through the lens of what would support success for students and educators. Our path forward plan, along with other resources, were developed with feedback from community partners and public health experts. In addition to accountability and distance learning guidance, we provided specific supports to districts and schools to help them in servicing students who were most in need of their help, including those who are differently abled and those who are English learners. As the superintendent said at the beginning, I want to note that there are many more slides here that share some accountability data, but we wanted to be concise for the purpose of your agenda today. And we are happy now, Chair, to take your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that presentation. I know I have at least one question in the queue, and I'm looking at everyone. Can you raise your hand if there's, I know I have Assemblywoman Nguyen, I have Assemblywoman Torres. Assemblywoman Tolles took a drink of her drink and I went over there. Okay, so we will start with Assemblywoman Nguyen.
Hi there. Thank you for the presentation. I'm wondering what kind of guidance the Nevada Department of Education has released for school reopenings.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Superintendent Ebert, for the record, there are several documents that are linked to the slide deck, the ones that Jessica just provided. Our first one that we released in multiple languages was called the Path Forward. It included several components that you see implemented in several of our school districts, I'm proud to say. Health and safety. It includes social emotional was at the top of our work, and then all the various components. More than happy to make sure that you have a copy as well.
I'll make sure I take a look at it if it was included in the documents. Thank you.
Do you happen to know what page that slide begins, by any chance, Superintendent?
Superintendent Ebert, for the record, it's slide 39, has a link to those documents.
I put you on the spot and you rose to the occasion. Thank you very much. Next, we will go to Assemblywoman Torres.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Superintendent, and your team for all the work that you've been doing over the last couple of months, where I know it's been particularly challenging as education has truly transformed what it looks like only just a year ago now. So my question is regarding English language learners and kind of a follow-up from AB 219, which passed last legislative session, which said that our Nevada assessments would be available in other languages. And so I'm just wondering if we can get an update on that. And obviously, I understand that the department is hoping that the assessments won't take place this year, but what work has been done to secure contracts to ensure that those will be available?
Thank you, Assemblywoman. As noted in 219, we wanted to be able to move forward with the SBAC assessment. It is available in 2 languages. When we went to work with the contractors, there was not funding that was made available to administer it this year. As you note, in multiple languages, as you noted, we're not quite sure at this point in time if we will be administering that assessment. But that is the intent, to continue to move forward to identify those funds to be able to offer in multiple languages, not just 2.
Follow up if I may, Chair?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And so if I remember correctly from the last legislative session, I know that the contract was about to expire. So I'm just wondering when the new contract would be created, and if at least a couple languages would be able to be included for that.
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Torres. That contract, we will be going out for a new RFP in 2 years, but that does not stop us from funds, if funds are made available to, and negotiating the contract as well, to be able to move forward. So at this point in time, we're currently working with our with our Read by Grade 3 assessment tool that went out to RFP, and then we're working with purchasing our college and career readiness assessment. It's the next RFP that we'll do, and then after that will be the full 3.8 SBAC, which is currently SBAC, will go out. So it's a staggered process year over year.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And if you could send us any information too that you have on this, the pass rate for the SBACs in all subjects for our English language learners. My understanding right now is that our English language learners do not do particularly well in their math or science SBAC, despite that English not being the skill that's assessed. So I just want to make sure that we're capturing accurate data for our EL students. So I'd like to review those numbers as well.
Thank you. More than happy to provide you those numbers.
Thank you, Superintendent. And if you could send them over to our committee, and we'll make sure that all the members of the committee get that information. Are there other questions? I'm just curious if I know we've talked to superintendents throughout the state, and obviously you have as well. And I was just wondering if you could provide a picture of, just sort of in aggregate, the amount of students that we have not been able to get back through COVID. I know most counties are at least in a hybrid or back totally. I know Clark County School District is obviously still completely virtual, and I just was wondering if we had a whole state number of kids that we have not been able to locate or get back into their education system this year.
Thank you, Chair. I want to make sure I'm answering the question that you are asking. If you're asking for total enrollment across the state and do we have as many students participating in education, or are you asking for an overview of how all 17 school districts are educating our children?
I was wondering if we had a percentage of students that we were unaccounted for, actually.
So we did, across the entire state, we did see a drop in enrollment. It was about 2%, and that varies based on the school districts. We have several school districts which will tell you, and I believe they presented, superintendents presented earlier, is that some families were opting to homeschool their children during the pandemic. What has been wonderful, our superintendents have been working very hard, is that those school districts that are fully face-to-face have been offering learning at a distance. So there is parent choice in that realm. Where we see the largest dip in enrollment is actually with our kindergartners. So there we have, I believe it's around, I want to say close to 10% drop in enrollment from year over year. And right now, we speculate two things. One is that we don't require, as you know, as a state, we don't require kindergarten. And then also two, the pandemic and families keeping their younger children at home.
And to Piggy, are we anticipating that these children will go to kindergarten next year, or that they'll just drop in for first grade, which is what only thing that's actually regulated here in the state, that they start first grade?
Thank you, Chair. Superintendent Ebert, for the record. I really appreciate that question because I'm going to actually expand it just a little bit. During the pandemic, we know that we have had several families and children that have been able to accelerate their learning. They're in an environment, they have resources. I'll use an example. Maybe their mom is an English teacher, and so they've accelerated in their reading as a fourth grader. But in other areas, we know that families with minimal resources have not had the same opportunities, and so they are not accelerating through education, and actually is a K-curve. We've spun up a Blue Ribbon Commission, which actually Assemblywoman Tools is part of, and we're looking at moving away, especially during the pandemic, from just saying strictly chronological age. You're 8 years old, we're going to place you in kindergarten, we're going to place you, in third grade, and we're going to place you in third grade curriculum. What we need to do is understand where our children are at when they return to a face-to-face environment. And I will also add, some of them may not return to a face-to-face environment because they love being at a distance. They're thriving, and they've learned that learning at a distance is a great thing. So as we all evolve, the adults in the system and the children, meeting the children where they're at is critical. So I'll round it out back to your original question with the kindergartners. We may see some that are ready and, charge into that first grade classroom because of the exposure they've had, the experiences they have. We have others that might not be ready. And we as the adults in the room need to be ready to meet those children where they're at. And so it's going to be a large continuum that we're working with the superintendents across the state to make sure that we address and meet the children where they're at, and that we accelerate them through their learning if they need accelerating, or take them to a next level beyond their chronological age and grade and curriculum.
Thank you for that answer. And it's looking like we don't have any other questions. So I thank you so much for your presentation, and I look forward to working with you in the committee.
Sarah, I have a question.
See? I didn't see your hand up. Vice Chair Miller, I apologize. Go ahead.
Thank you. Superintendent, when we're referring to the numbers of the less enrollment that we're having across the state this year, Of course, kindergarten, that makes it, I think we can all agree there's probably some obvious anecdotal reasons why we'd see a reduction in kindergarten. But for the other grades, do we know yet? Because I know, just from the experience that the state had in 2011, I know from my own experiences with my own students this year and the conversations, there are a lot of people who are physically leaving Nevada because, of course, people need it, people need work, or people need to then live with family members that may be in another state, because again, finances are dictating what needs to happen. And so I'm just wondering, do we have, and on the same token, I know that I've been teaching my students virtually and they're in different states and in some cases different countries, and still, because the idea is that they will return back to Nevada. So do we know, has anyone looked at, or we have a handle on how many of the students that we say are not enrolled anymore? Because they're all not just homeschooled. Do we actually know where they are, and how many is it because they actually physically have left the state or left the district, even, moved somewhere else in the state?
Superintendent Ebert, for the record, thank you. That's a great question. That we do not drill down on each individual child. That would be at the district level. We have the aggregate data for school districts and grade levels, but those individual children that you're talking about, that is not data that we collect at the state level. We just know if they've enrolled or unenrolled and moved to another state, and that would be in that 2% in reduction overall in enrollment.
Okay, so that would state that they have left the state if they identify that they moved.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we would have aggregate, but not at. I would need to check with my team on the specific districts.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And thank you again, Superintendent. I did want to let everyone know, the committee and anybody who's watching, that the annual reports are also on Nellis. We are really trying to do everything we can to provide information to folks out watching us virtually. So everything that we've discussed or mentioned, you can find in those annual reports as well. So thank you very much again, Superintendent and team, and we look forward to working with you this legislative session.
Thank you for having us. We're available for your technical assistance at any time.
Wonderful. Okay, so now we'll move on to our second presentation. I believe actually, Superintendent, you're going to introduce our next presentation.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, on Nevada class size and educator workforce. So thank you.
Thank you for having us here today to be able to present this information. One of the things, and your colleagues here are great, asking those questions with data. And that's one of the things that we asked as a team. Deputy Gonzalez, who leads our work with educator effectiveness, about a year ago, we said, we need to have data. We can't just go by, well, I heard this, I heard that, I think, and I know there's great brains out there, but being a mathematician, I love to have data. And so we used part of our Title IIA federal funds to contract with data insight partners to answer these questions that you're going to receive a little bit of insight into. Here again, too, there is a very large deck for you to refer to at a later time. We know that we're time bound this morning, but this is a great presentation that has historical data that will show trends within our workforce, and then also how you as legislators have supported education in the past and have seen great strides because of that support. So with that, I'd like to turn the time over to Nathan Trenholm, who is an amazing human being, to share what we have learned through the data that was collected across the state over years.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Ebert. Chair Bilbray Axelrod, Vice Chair Miller, committee members. For the record, my name is Nathan Trenholm with Data Insight Partners. Data Insight Partners is a small business in Las Vegas, Nevada. We work with schools, districts, state departments of education, nonprofits in the education sector. This work today, we're extremely humbled and grateful at the opportunity to share with you our analysis on Nevada class sizes and the teacher workforce. This work is near and dear to our hearts, especially because we actually have kids in the K-12 system, the public schools here in Nevada. So we're really excited at this opportunity to share this with you. And before I get started, I want to say a big thank you to the Nevada Department of Education for their support in this work under the leadership of Superintendent Joan Ebert, as well as the leadership of Deputy Superintendent Felicia Gonzalez and her team, who've been instrumental in supporting this project over the last year. What you're going to see today is a report that summarizes over a billion data points spanning 2 decades of information coming from sources from the U.S. Department of Education, multiple systems in the Nevada Department of Education, as well as local school districts and charter schools. So this was a massive undertaking that culminated in thousands of pages that was condensed down to a 170-page summary, which you have as an exhibit to this agenda item. However, we won't be going through all 170 pages today. It'll kind of be a highlight, the best of the best of. But if you have the opportunity, if you haven't already, I strongly recommend you take the time to review all 70 pages, all 170 pages, because this is honestly one of the most important and honestly impressive pieces of work I've ever had the opportunity to contribute to. So with that, let's get started. So one of the things that when we look at education data, a critical question we need to ask and investigate first is what happens when Nevada makes strategic investments in education, right? So the most frequent or the most recent major investment was towards early literacy. So over about the last 7 years, hundreds of millions of dollars were directed towards early literacy through the programs of full day kindergarten, class size reduction, Zoom schools, Victory schools, and Read by Grade 3. Now, not all of this money was specifically for early literacy, but a huge portion of this money was directed towards early literacy. And as it happens, the federal government tests the nation's 4th graders in reading every 2 years. They use an assessment called the National Assessment of Educational Progress. It is the largest assessment in the country. It's considered the gold standard of student assessments. Anytime you see any type of educational rankings, this is the assessment that it's at the core of those rankings. So what we see here is the national average reading scores for 4th graders from 2003 to 2009. Now, what you'll see right below that is Nevada's 4th graders over that time. So prior to this massive investment in early literacy, Nevada's 4th graders were consistently performing academically a year behind their national peers. Now, in 2019, the first cohort that had exposure from kindergarten through 4th grade to these massive investments in early literacy took the NAEP 4th grade reading test. So what happened when this cohort who had the exposure to investment, what happened when they finally were tested in 4th grade reading? For the first time ever, Nevada's 4th graders performed in line with their national peers. So prior to the investment, 4th graders were performing academically a year behind their national peers. In 2019, 4th graders were performing for the first time ever in line with their national peers. But you don't have to take my word for it. We can look at this screenshot from the U.S. Department of Education's website. Here it says the 2019 average scale score for Nevada is not significantly different from the national public. Here's another screenshot that ranks states in their improvements in 4th grade reading from 2009 to 2019. What you'll see is that only 3 states in the entire country improved faster than Nevada's 4th graders. So our 4th graders have been improving significantly faster than their national peers over the last decade. So when we ask the question, what happens when we make strategic investments in education in Nevada? Student outcomes improve, right? Nevada education is a system worth investing in. So now that we know that, what is the biggest threat to the academic gains our students have made? So what we know is the most important factor affecting student learning is the classroom teacher. What we don't know is how reliable is every student's access to a quality teacher in a reasonable class size. Now, before we answer this question, I want to go over some context for our review, some local headlines around this subject over the last few years. In 2016, Nevada declared a teacher shortage emergency. In 2018, a study showed that Nevada schools had the largest average class sizes in the country. Just this last November, there was an emergency so that substitutes with only a high school diploma could be hired. Right? So we know we have a massive problem here in Nevada regarding our teacher shortage. So the purpose of today's analysis is to ask some strategic questions so we can get more specific about the scope of this problem and what are our obstacles to solving it. So the strategic questions we're going to investigate today include, what are the actual class sizes our students are experiencing? How many teachers do we need? Do students have equitable access to teachers? And what obstacles do we face from solving these problems? Another way to think about that is to say, where are we? Where do we want to be? Are those differences equitable? And what are the obstacles we have to overcome to solve this? So the first question we'll explore is, what are the actual class sizes our students are experiencing? This chart here shows the class sizes for the core classes for 1st through 5th grade and the core classes in secondary for English, math, science, and history from the last school year. The way you could read this is, the average 2nd grader in Nevada had a class size of 20. The average secondary student had a history class size of 30. Now, the recommended class sizes in Nevada for grades 1 through 3 is 15. The recommended class sizes for grades 4 through 12 is 25. Now, these recommendations were set by the State Board of Education in 2018. So we're going to take those recommendations and impose them on this chart. Now we see that all the averages are larger than the recommended class sizes. But the million-dollar question is, how many students is this impacting? Right? So how many students were in a class size larger than the recommended class size? I'll let you think about it for a second. Do you think it was less than 100,000? Do you think it was 100,000 to 200,000? Do you think it was 200 to 300,000? Or more than 300,000 students? The answer is more than 300,000. There were 374,000 students sitting in a core class last year larger than the recommended class size. That's 87% of all students. In other words, about 9 in 10 students had a class size larger than the recommended class size last year. So that's where we are. Where do we want to be? How many teachers would we need to meet the recommended class sizes? Currently, for just the core classes in grades 1 through 5, we have about 8,300 teachers. To get to the recommended class sizes, we would need over 2,000 more teachers. For the core subjects in secondary, we would need almost another 1,000 teachers. So if we wanted to get the core classes down to the recommended class sizes, we would need 3,000 more teachers today. Okay? Now, that can sound like a huge number, 3,000 teachers, because we're used to kind of hearing about teacher shortages in how many vacancies there are, right? So you'll hear Clark County has 300 teacher vacancies. So how could you say we have 300 teacher vacancies, but we need 3,000 teachers? Teacher vacancies is a function of how many funded positions are empty. It's a different question to say, how many teachers do we need, right? And to verify that this is actually a very conservative estimate, we can look at national student-teacher ratios. So right now, the average in the country is that there is a classroom teacher for every 14.9 students. So about a teacher for every 15 students. In Vermont, where they have the lowest ratio, they have a teacher for every 10.5 students. So how many teachers would we need in Nevada to meet these system-wide ratios? To just meet the average, Nevada would need almost 10,000 more teachers today. That's just to be average. If we wanted to lead the nation in staffing, we would need another 24,000 teachers. To summarize what we just looked at, just to improve core classes, we need over 3,000 teachers. To improve the entire system to staff at a national average, we need almost 10,000 more teachers. And if we wanted to lead the nation, we would need over 23,000 more teachers today. So we've looked at where we are, where we want to be. Now the question is, are these differences equitable across student groups? Do all students have equitable access to teachers? To investigate this question, we're going to plot the average classroom experience for students in 1st through 3rd grade by student ethnicity. Now, when I show you the dots along the x-axis, the left to right, that's going to measure what is their average class size. So the farther to the left their dot, the smaller their class size. Along the vertical, up and down, that's a measure of their access to experienced teachers. So how many of those students have an experienced teacher leading their classroom? So the higher the dot, the more experienced the teachers. So you want to be in the green. That's smaller class sizes, more experienced teachers. Down in the red, you have larger class sizes, less experienced teachers. Here were the experiences for our 1st and 3rd graders last year. What you'll notice down in the bottom left-hand corner is that Black and Hispanic students have slightly smaller class sizes, but they have significantly less access to experienced teachers. So a white student is about 30% more likely to have an experienced teacher than a Black student. And the trade-off is about a student and a half per classroom. So the question is, does that same pattern exist for 4th through 5th grade? The answer is that it does. Again, now a white student is about 45% more likely to have an experienced teacher than a Black student. And the trade-off now is less than 1 student per classroom. Does this same pattern exist for secondary students? It does. Now, you may notice in secondary, all students have more access to experienced teachers because at the secondary level, teachers are less likely to switch grade levels and subjects in schools. However, the same pattern exists, which is that Black and Hispanic students have slightly smaller class sizes, but they have significantly less access to experienced teachers. So it's one thing that they have disparate access. The next question is this disparate access associated with disparate student outcomes? To investigate this question, we're going to look at the same type of plot, but now we're going to plot schools by star rating. And again, we're looking at the secondary level. And what we see is that 5-star schools, students in those schools have significantly higher access to experienced teachers, and they have slightly larger class sizes. So if you're in a 5-star school at the secondary level, there is a 3 in 4 chance you have an experienced teacher. If you're in a 1-star school, there's only a 1 in 3 chance you have an experienced teacher. So you're twice as likely to have an experienced teacher in a 5-star school than you are in a 1-star school. Does that same pattern exist for the elementary level? It does. Again, if you're in a 5-star school, you more than likely have an experienced teacher. If you're in a 1-star school, there's only a 1 in 3 chance you have an experienced teacher. So here's the question. 1 and 2-star schools, they have smaller class sizes. Should we expect higher achievement from these schools since they have smaller class sizes? To investigate this, we can look at what the research tells us. Here's a summary of class size research from the Brown Center on Education Policy at Brookings. Now, the first summary here is for a class size reduction study that was done in Tennessee in the 80s. This is the most famous study on class sizes that was ever done. It was a statewide randomized control study, and they found that when they reduced class sizes from 22 down to 15, a 32% reduction in class sizes, they saw an increase in student achievement. Here's a summary of subsequent research that validated those findings. And in this, they say very large class size reductions on the order of magnitude of 7 to 10 fewer students per class can have significant long-term effects on student achievement and other meaningful outcomes. So let's go back to what's happening in our schools. We look at the 1 and 2 star schools, and unlike the study in Tennessee, they are not sitting in class sizes of 15, they are sitting in class sizes of 21 and 22, which were the large class sizes in the Tennessee study. Additionally, when we compare class sizes in 1 and 2 star schools to the 4 and 5 star schools, the difference is 2 to 4 students, not the 7 to 10 students that the research says is required. So we do not have a difference in class sizes here that would be required to us expect a higher improvement in student outcomes. And finally, they don't have the same access to teachers. The students in the 1 and 2 star schools have significantly less access to experienced teachers than do students in 4 and 5 star schools. So to summarize, Black and Hispanic students have significantly less access to experienced teachers compared to their Asian and Caucasian peers. Students in 1 and 2 star schools have significantly lower access to experienced teachers. And despite the slightly smaller class sizes, the research says it's not a large enough difference to expect improved student outcomes. So next, what are the obstacles we face to improve these issues? First, we're going to explore the educator preparation pipeline. When I say the educator preparation pipeline, I'm talking about programs that people go through so they can be eligible for a teacher license. So this could be a 4-year program in education at a university, or it can be an alternative route to licensure. What we're going to do is compare these pipelines across all the states in the country. To make it an apples to apples comparison, we're going to look at this as a ratio of the students that each state serves. So we're going to look at the number of education preparation graduates for every 1,000 students a state serves. What you see in this chart is every state ranked from top to bottom. On average, a state puts out 3 program completers for every 1,000 students they serve. At the top, we have Vermont. They're putting out almost 6 program completers for every 1,000 students they serve. Now, that's not surprising. We just earlier saw they have the lowest teacher ratios in the country. So where's Nevada? We're down at the bottom, right? We have about half the national average. We're putting out about 1.6 program completers for every 1,000 students we serve. The result, the ramifications of this, as noted in the teacher workforce report, is that Nevada relies on over 60% of its new teachers to come from preparation programs outside of Nevada. So if we're relying so heavily on external programs, we need to know what's happening with that national pipeline. Here's the national pipeline over the last decade. U.S. teacher preparation program graduates have dropped by over 30% over the last decade. And that's not just as a ratio to students, that is actual total numbers, right? Graduates went from 216,000 down to 150,000 nationally over that decade, right? So this pipeline is significantly and consistently shrinking over time. So to summarize, Nevada's teacher pipeline significantly lags national averages. We rely on out-of-state teacher prep programs for over 60% of our new teachers. And the national pipeline we're relying on is significantly and consistently shrinking over time. And Nevada's pipeline is not expanding at a fast enough rate to make up for the shrinking national pipeline. So the next obstacle that we face that we're going to go into today is the teacher retention and attrition. So if the pipeline is shrinking, are we at least doing a better job at retaining our teachers? To look at this, we're going to classify classroom teachers at the end of the year into one of 3 categories. They're either a stayer, a mover, or a leaver. A stayer is someone who stays in the classroom at the same school year over year. A mover is someone who continues to teach in the classroom, but they move to another school. And a leaver is someone who no longer stays in the classroom at all. They've left the classroom teaching profession. Now, this is a methodology that's used by the U.S. Department of Education, so we can look at national data that they've put out. So the most recent data that they've put out spans 1989 through 2013. And we can look at the leaver rates of what it looks like nationally. That is, what percent of classroom teachers leave classroom teaching every year. Over this time frame, it ranged from 5.1% to 8.4%. So that's what this yellow band here is in this chart. Those are the national averages for teacher leaver rates. Now, you want to try to beat the national rate. You want to have less teachers leaving the classroom. So green is better. If you have higher leaver rates, that would be up in the red. So now we're going to look at Nevada's teacher leaver rate over the last 2 decades. What you'll see is that Nevada's teacher leaver rate has consistently been higher than the national average for the last 2 decades. The only time we even touched the national average was at the height of the Great Recession in 2009, when there was nowhere to leave to, right? Now you look at this and see that Nevada's teacher leaver rates kind of bounce around between 10 and 12%, and the national average is around 7%. So that seems like it's not a big deal. But if you wanted to reduce your teacher leaver rate from 12% down to 7%, that's a 42% reduction in the number of teachers leaving the classroom every year. And if we had matched the national rate 2011 through 2017, that would have resulted in thousands of more teachers in the classroom today. So when we look at teacher attrition, is there anything that can help predict this? What we have here is plotted the teacher leaver rates by teacher age for the last 2 decades. And so what you'll see is this first stat, the average leaver rate for teachers under age 25 is about 17%. As teachers get older and enter their mid-career, their leaver rates reduce, right? Until they get down to about age 45 to 49. At age 50, the leaver rates start to increase again as teachers approach retirement. By age 55, the teacher rate exceeds the state rate, okay? So what we can see here then is that age 50, leaver rates start to accelerate. By age 55, they exceed the state rate. So the question is, how many of our teachers are 50 years or older? Right now, it's the highest that it's ever been. Right? Almost 1 in 3 Nevada classroom teachers are age 50 or older. Back in 1998, it was 1 in 4 teachers. So how many of our teachers are younger? So the percent of teachers who are under 30 years old is 14%. Back in 1998, it was all the way up at 22%. Now, what I want to draw your attention to here is that what happens every time we have a recession, our teaching workforce gets older. Because what happens is, it's not that teachers are getting laid off. Instead, we don't fill vacancies. So every time there's a budget cut, we're not hiring young teachers, and our teacher workforce is getting older. So to summarize, at age 50, leaver rates start to increase. By age 55, leaver rates exceed the overall state average. At age 50 right now in this school year is the most popular age of our classroom teachers. And hiring young teachers contracts during a recession. So why is all of this so alarming? Because of what we just previously saw is that the pipeline for new teachers is consistently shrinking over time. So at the very time our leaver rates are likely to accelerate over the next 5 years, the pipeline of new teachers is also shrinking. So to summarize all that, Nevada's teacher attrition rates have continuously lagged the national averages. Our African-American teachers, teachers under 25, and teachers over 55 are the most likely to leave the classroom. Nevada's teacher workforce is older than it has ever been and will likely lead to an acceleration of leaver rates over the next 5 years. And at the same time these leaver rates are likely to accelerate, the national teacher pipeline that we so heavily rely on is shrinking. So the conclusions of all of this analysis, right? Nevada class sizes are too big. 9 in 10 students are sitting in a class larger than the recommended class size. Nevada needs more teachers. Just to improve the core classes, we need 3,000 teachers today. To improve the system-wide totals, we need almost 10,000 teachers. And to lead the nation, we would need almost 24,000 teachers today. Now, not all of our students have equitable access to experienced teachers, and the lack of access to experienced teachers is associated with lower student outcomes. We saw that Nevada's teacher pipeline significantly lags national averages to the point that we're relying on over 60% of our teachers to be prepared outside of Nevada. And the national teacher pipeline is shrinking, which is what you see in that top line, while at the same time, Nevada's teacher pipeline, the lower line there, is not expanding. Something we didn't have time to go into today, but is in detail in the exhibit that you have, is sometimes you'll hear that classroom positions or positions external to the classroom are inflated. So we investigated that as well. And we saw that in all the positions where national data is available, Nevada is staffing these positions under national staffing ratios. So we have less school administrators, less counselors, less central administrators, and less library specialists than national staffing ratios. We saw that the teacher shortage problem is compounded by the fact that Nevada's teacher attrition rates have continuously exceeded national averages. We saw that these leaver rates start to accelerate by age 50 and exceed the state rate by age 55. At the very time, we have the most teachers in that age range than we've ever had. Another thing that we didn't have time to go into today, but again is in more detail in the exhibit you have, is teacher morale is alarmingly low. So we provided all of the survey data that the U.S. Department of Education did so we can compare teacher morale across the country. And so one thing that I want to bring us back to, because we just saw a lot of alarming information, is a reminder to the question, does Nevada have an education system worth investing in? And we saw the last time we made a large strategic investment that the cohort that had the exposure to that investment was the first cohort ever to perform in line with their national peers in reading. So Nevada does have an education system worth investing in. So I leave you with this quote from St. Augustine. Hope has 2 beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see that they do not remain as they are. And with that, I thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I know we have a couple of questions, and I really appreciate this information. I'm glad you ended with that quote because that's something that we all need. It was sobering. I think we have Assemblywoman Nguyen up first.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a question. You had mentioned some of the specific differences and equity, like inequity, I should say, between our Black and Latino students as compared to the Asian and Caucasian populations within these student, like this data, like I guess information. And I know that the Asian community is just growing in Nevada. It's probably the fastest growing. I think that's the term that we've heard in the statistics here in our state. But I also know that often that data is compiled for all Asian Americans and they are treated just kind of as this monolithic group. I don't believe that you do this, but would you be open to disaggregating that data so we would be able to see the real results within that Asian community so we don't get that model minority and we're not losing out on true representation within, you know, the inequities within that group? Is that something that you guys do? One, I don't think you do. Or is that something, two, that you look at in determining some of these inequities? I know that's an important aspect of what you guys are doing.
Assemblywoman Nguyen, thank you so much for that question. So the data that we had to do this analysis does not allow us to disaggregate any farther than where we did. So that information is coming from the student information system. And so the most disaggregated that it is Asian. So I love the question. I would love to be able to break it down further. We just don't have that granular of information, unfortunately.
Thank you. That's kind of what I thought. And I know that, it's fairly new, like mid-90s new, but to be able to look at that kind of information, and maybe we're a little behind, but if it is something that you guys are collecting data, I would hope that we would start to include that kind of disaggregated data because it's more representative. And Chair, I do have one other question, if it's possible.
Sure.
She goes somewhere.
Yes, go for it.
Okay, thank you. I think everyone can agree that smaller classrooms are needed. And, I'm new to the education committee this session, but obviously it's something that I hear about in my community from parents, from my neighbors, and I see it with my own kids in school. And especially as they've gone through school and they're still in elementary education, but their class sizes are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it doesn't seem like there's some sort of disconnect between what we've enacted as legislation, because I'm imagining we have the same conversation every 2 years during these presentations about how class sizes need to be smaller, and what the problems are. And I know that there has been legislation that's passed, and it seems like there's just no accountability in our schools. And I was wondering where that disconnect comes from. I mean, I've heard from teachers and I've seen for myself that it seems like some of these numbers, even with the ratio of teacher to student, are taking into consideration, they're dividing the number of all the licensed staff. So librarians, coaches, learning strategists, special education teachers. And so the ratio isn't even accurate. So you could have a ratio that looks like it's one teacher for every 20 students, but when you go into a classroom, it's actually one teacher and you have 40 students in it. So I'm wondering where that happens. Is that just like our math? Is that the way do we need to be more clear when we're doing our legislation so we can capture that? And I was wondering if you have any opinions about that.
Assemblywoman. So to that point, one of the things that we did in this analysis that's different than what you'll see oftentimes you kind of alluded to. Oftentimes they'll take, here's all the number of students we have in a grade level, and here's all the number of positions we're paying for. For this analysis, we went into actual core classrooms in the student information system to make a more accurate picture of what's happening. On top of that, what we did was, instead of averaging class sizes, we averaged student experiences. So the difference between those two things, we believe, paints a more accurate picture. So for example, if you had a class size of 30, and then you had a self-contained class of 4, the class average is 34 divided by 2, which is 17, right? And so you would report an average class size of 17. The way we did this analysis is we said, this student experienced a class size of 4, this student experienced a class size of 4, this one had 4, then this one had 30, 30, 30, 30, 30, which brings your average out to like 29, because now you're averaging at the student level instead of the classroom level. So what this analysis did, a few things that we hope, right, is really change the scope in the way people approach this information. So I kind of alluded to in the presentation where a lot of times people think about the teacher shortage as like 200 teachers, right? But what we really need to think about is, what do we want from our system, right? We have recommended class sizes. What would that take, right? And now it's 10,000 teachers, right? It's a very different conversation. And the same thing happens with this class size discussion, where compliance with federal law and reporting class sizes, they average at the class size, which is why we often see numbers that don't jive with people's experiences, right? It'll say, oh, the average class size was 17. Well, every student is saying, I'm sitting in a class of 30, right? So we're trying to bring a more nuanced picture to it and say, how many students were in a bigger class? And what was the average student experience? Because we care about what students are experiencing, not, averaging classes. So that was how we try to address both of those issues here and help kind of reframe these discussions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's a very important distinction. I appreciate that you made that. The next question we have is from Vice Chair Miller.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I hate to say that it's music to my ears because it's really not a great song. And yet we keep singing it, but I have been, diligently ticking away at the class size issue for the past 2 sessions. And specifically what Assemblywoman Nguyen was just referring to about how we actually come up with those numbers. And again, why the reality of what's in the classroom is different because as you explained for everyone, it's pretty much capturing all licensed employees, and it's not the real true experience of, classes with 40, 50, and 60 kids. And so my question based on the data and I also just want to really applaud you too, because I appreciate the fact that it's also being said that we're not just a few hundred positions short. If we took into consideration the recommendations of what the recommended class sizes actually are, that our numbers would be much higher. That being said, the other thing I look at when we're looking at class sizes and how I comfortably know we're in need of 10,000 teachers is that we're not just stating, including all the licensed employees, even if they, don't have their own student roster or such, but what about the full-time subs? Because in Nevada, we also have, thousands of students that they actually don't have a full-time licensed teacher. They have a full-time substitute who is filling that vacancy. So again, that makes our vacancies look much lower. And again, there is a difference between a full-time substitute and a fully licensed teacher. There's also other programs and alternative programs and stuff that fast track people in with, I've seen as little as 2-3 weeks of training. And so when we're looking at these numbers and we're talking about the teachers, are we considering and you even put up in some of your information about, emergency licenses and stuff, are we actually looking at what type of teachers are actually in the classroom based on how many adults are just filling vacancies?
So Vice Chair Miller, thank you so much for those questions and astute observations. You're exactly right? You already know you're right, but I want to reiterate, all the things that you just pointed out are so important. So you could think about the teacher shortage as vacancies, or you could think about how many do we need, right? And that was one of the distinctions we made here. You could also talk about class size and just say, how many kids are sitting in this class, but not realize, is it an experienced, high quality teacher sitting there? So that is why we made those charts that showed what is the access to experienced teachers to try and get to that. One of the limitations to this analysis is we couldn't connect the information that is in the state's teacher licensure system to what is in Infinite Campus. So Infinite Campus has the class sizes, but the state licensure will tell me if the person is a long-term sub or a experienced teacher. So what we had to do is connect data through Infinite Campus across multiple years, and then define an experienced teacher as having taught that class or that subject and school for at least 3 years. So that was our attempt to try and differentiate what you're getting at, which is, the class sizes might be 25, but it's actually even worse than that because those 25 aren't all being served by a high quality teacher. And that's exactly right. But right now, the best we could do is to say, by using the Infinite Campus data, to say how many years has this teacher been teaching this course at this school. So I can't tell you right now from the data that's available, how many of those classrooms were long-term subs or maybe first-year alternative route to licensure, just because the way it currently exists, those two systems don't have information that we could connect across there. But all of like, and we try to go into with this analysis all these nuances because again, class sizes could be manipulated by putting unexperienced people in there. Teacher vacancies can be manipulated by increasing class sizes. So we try to approach this from multiple angles to show you not everyone has access to an experienced teacher. We need way more teachers than what is just the vacancies, right? And so really trying to reframe this with some nuance, but at the same time, not going so far into the weeds that people can't engage with this information. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Follow up, Chair.
All right.
And I would like to I'll take this offline with you about how to actually make these systems connect, because last session I actually passed a bill that required the school boards to actually publish publicly how many students were actually in front of each teacher, per the day, so that that information would be available because of that, so that it wasn't just the schools or the districts giving averages, but you could see that period 1, this teacher has 47 students, period 2, 45 students, sometimes as high as close to 60 students. So again, I really would like to get to the core, if you have some suggestions on how we can get to the core where we're actually seeing the real raw numbers and not these averages, because the averages that even in this report are very far off from the experiences, as Assemblywoman Wynn said, the experiences of many of our students in many of our classrooms. So I would love to take that offline with you. But thank you for your report and your data.
Thank you. And I know, thank you, Chair Miller, Vice Chair Miller. I believe that we still have Superintendent Ebert here. Assemblywoman Hardy had a question for you, but if you, Mr. Trinnell, if you would just stay put for a moment, because we might be coming back to you as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this presentation, and especially for the way that you laid out the data in a very easy way to understand and grasp. And I think it just shows, all of the different areas in Nevada that we have some problems and things that need to be addressed in our schools. It was interesting when you went through and talked about how the higher star schools had more experienced teachers and the lower starred schools had more unexperienced teachers, and the correlation in the student performance between if they had a more experienced or unexperienced teacher. So I just wanted to ask Department of Ed, do we have programs currently to incentivize teachers to stay in their schools, especially like in those underserved communities?
Thank you, Superintendent Ebert, for the record. Yes, there are incentives specifically for Title I schools that are made available across, and then also individual school districts have incentivized teachers as well into those schools.
Okay, because I think that's important because, ideally we would like to have more teachers so that we can have smaller class sizes. But if there's somehow a way to get those experienced teachers, as you said, to not be movers, but to maybe stay where they are and work with some of these students, it would, I think, could be beneficial. So thank you.
Thank you so much for jumping back on there, Superintendent. Do we have any other questions for all this great data that we just got? I had heard about this presentation, and we actually got the Cliff's Notes version of it. I don't know if Superintendent Ebert mentioned that, but you have the entire slide presentation, so you can go and look at that. But it's some really great information that, as you've seen, has not been presented this way before. So did Assemblywoman Hanson, I see your right hand go up? No, okay. Anyone? Bueller? Anyone? All right, well, thank you. That was fantastic. And believe me, we will be in contact more. And we really appreciate you spending some time with us and talking about where we're headed, where we need to head. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.
Absolutely. All right. Now we will go on to our last public comments. Remember, you have 2 minutes for public comment and clearly state and spell your name. Broadcast production, do we have any callers?
Yes, Chair, we have one caller currently in queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 577. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, my name is Chris Daly, D-A-L-Y, Nevada State Education Association, the voice of Nevada educators for over 120 years. Gotten to watch the presentation on class size 3 times now, and a few of the slides really jump out. The slide on the progress made in the 4th grade reading scores on the NAEP examination. Great news that Nevada's early literacy supports and special categorical programming have paid off. Unfortunately, in the governor's budget submission, we're faced with $33 million in proposed cuts to early literacy supports in the read by grade 3. And also keep in mind that any movement to the new funding plan really just dissolves the state's strategic investments, including read by grade 3, Zoom, and Victory. Why NSEA has been calling for a delay and a rethinking of the implementation of SB 543. Another slide that jumps out, obviously, the 87% of Nevada students in a class that's larger than the size recommended by the Board of Education. 375,000 Nevada students in overcrowded classrooms. And I know this is not a money committee, but over in the money committees, we're fighting a proposed $156 million proposed cut to the class size reduction program in the next biennium. That's why NSEA is red for ed. That's why we'll be out in front of the legislature Monday at noon. We hope to see you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daly, for the phone call, and thank you for confirming this presentation. I understand you've seen it in its entirety, and it really is fascinating. So we have no more public comment, is that correct?
That is correct, Chair. The line is open and working, but there are no more callers at this time.
Okay, are there any comments from members before we adjourn? Taking a look. Okay, our next committee meeting will be Tuesday, February 16th at 1:30. That concludes our meeting for today, and this meeting is adjourned.